This is Brandon Parker. Welcome to the Legends of Land show, where it's my job to deconstruct the tactics of elite land investors, how they think about their business, and strategies that drive their success. My guest today is Eddie Speed. Eddie's purchased over 40,000 real estate notes in his nearly 40-year career. He's a founder of NoteSchool, and his team has acquired $3.5 billion in notes. Eddie specializes in buying and selling notes, focuses on very high value notes. His methods have earned him multiple industry awards and an induction into the Small Business or Real Estate Hall of Fame. You can find him on his websites, eddiespeed.com and noteschool.com. In this conversation, we cover what Eddie thinks of the current note industry, what can make it better, and some very strategic tactics for success in the note game. Things that can blow up your business and things that can make you have a beautiful empire. So Eddie is a true legend. This was a eye-opening episode. And so without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation from Eddie Speed.
The Legends of Land show with Brandon Parker. Deconstruct the tactics of world-class land investors and learn tools to build a seven-figure land business. The Legends of Land show is starting now.
So welcome to the show, Eddie. How you doing today?
I'm good, Brandon. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Thank you. Pleasure to have you on the show today. You've been in the industry for 4 decades. What are your biggest takeaways, what you've learned, and what you see in the industry today?
I would say the biggest takeaway I've learned, particularly with land, is that you start out looking at the property and you look at a buyer that's going to buy that property from you. And let's say that you're going to carry paper on it. You're going to owner finance it. First question always should be, how do they fulfill their dreams? If you're selling a piece of land to someone and they can't fulfill their dreams on the property, then my life experience is them paying over a really long period of time becomes a low percentage shot. Just an observation I've made after looking at it. I started in 1980, so a long time. And I've had a lot of looks at it, and that seems to be the pattern.
And so you think with the long-term dream, people are going to just continue paying, but without the long-term dream, something's going to go awry at some point, and you're going to be needed to retake that.
Yeah, my official stance is I don't buy notes on swamp lots and dirt lot and sand lots. Why? Because I've never done it, or because I have done it.
So tell about a time that you've done it and what happened with that, how it goes sideways.
It won't model and pay over 20 years. I mean, the chances of default are excessively high. And what I figured out is because they can't fulfill their dreams. We were working on a land note just literally a day or two ago, and we were investigating what it took to put water on the property. So the property cost $35,000, but to put a well on it was going to cost $65,000. You think they feel like they're going to fulfill their dreams? Or are they going to carry 5-gallon buckets?
Yeah, exactly.
So I look at it backwards. I'm a good note buyer for paper that pays. And there's the first 2 characteristics that define the value of any note are, number 1, the borrower, and number 2, the collateral. There's 6 characteristics that influence the value of a note, but that's 1 and 2.
And what do you think? What are the next 6, or what are the next 4?
Equity, terms of the loan, interest rate of the note, how long it's payable, pay history, and paperwork.
And so it almost sounds like you're the Warren Buffett of note investing. You're just looking for very quality fundamentals, long-term buy, and we know that this is going to work out over the span of 20 years.
I think what we've done is take seller financing and pasted mortgage banking over the top of it. And so we put a business model to it, and we help people put a business model to it. We help people make better notes. And when they make better notes, their notes are more valuable. They're more valuable to them if they keep them. They're more valuable to us if we buy them. And then we figure out ways for them to minimize their discount. We figure out ways for them to have long-term. There's all kind of opportunities you can do it. And Brandon, a little bit of this stuff, I'm just guessing, right? It's so many years and so many portfolios. And now I have a meeting with my team this morning, and we go through 6 portfolios that we have working at the moment. So it's a little hard to say when I throw a dart and say I've looked at 8,000 portfolios of land notes. I didn't actually have a clicker and click it every time I looked at one, but I'm just using a little bit of math of what our historical numbers are as far as how many deals we see over a quarter and a year and look back over time and that type of thing. I bought easily over 20,000 land notes. And I've learned the pattern of land notes that I buy. And I look at all the land notes that I didn't buy. If I bought 2,000 portfolios and I've looked at 8,000, well, what happened to the 6,000 I didn't buy, right? You can't buy 20,000 land notes and have a ridiculous price. Is that a fair statement? You got to have fair pricing or you can't buy that much business. But at the same time, when did I decide I didn't want to do business with them versus they didn't want to do business with me? And so right now, is the land business there's a lot of gurus in it. And there's a lot of things that are said, some of which I agree with and some of which I absolutely don't agree with. There's not a land guru out there today that's been doing this for 44 years. Let's just agree on that. There's not a land guru today that's ever owned $1 billion worth of land notes. So my experience probably tops their guru status.
Absolutely.
It could happen.
You have a podcast you do yourself, and where can people find you online?
So we own a school called NoteSchool. That school, I've trained people to do creative financing and stuff, and I'm not saying we will never do that, but I don't want your audience to feel like, hey, this is a hook to go drive me to NoteSchool. But I have a podcast called NoteSchool TV on YouTube. And so really the people that we train how to do the business are high net worth people. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're business owners, they're high-end realtors. They're people that want to buy notes because they don't want to fool with buying rental properties or they're scared of investing in syndications and stuff. So we teach note investing as an alternative. Then our students that go down the road with us, they want us to provide done-for-you services. My sister company, Colonial Funding, they want us to provide funding. They want us to go find notes, filter them, put our experience over the top of them, and then close them and put a ribbon on them, and then they can buy them. And so that is a source. That is not solely a source, but that is a source of our capital stack of how we fund our business. We have a couple of joint venture partners with some significant funds that essentially have family office level money. But once again, everybody that I have some connection with, they're relying on our experience. They're relying on us looking back over time and saying, that paper has a propensity to pay. Like you can model it. You can predict the result. If you buy 100 of those loans, you can predict the results. Nobody can predict the result in one loan, right? You can't stick a thermometer in one deal's mouth and know what's going to happen because you can have the best piece of land in the world and okay, mom and dad get killed in a car wreck or somebody gets cancer or what, like some bad things happen to people and it's unpredictable. But statistically, we're pretty good at measuring the odds. So we look at our give back to the industry is we want to help your audience with how to make the best notes, whether they sell them or keep them.
And you mentioned those 6 criteria. Maybe can you dive into each of those a little bit further and get into tactically how to make the best note or how to analyze a note that people are looking at?
So let's start out with the borrower. You are creating a note. So a note is a promise to pay. So somebody is promising to pay you back. If you're making a loan to someone, somebody's signing the note and they say, Brandon, I'm going to pay you back. Well, what are their track record of paying others back? What is their ability to pay people back? People get excited and buy a piece of property and then they wake up one day and figure out they can't afford it. So without having income and without looking at credit and without them doing, what do you got? So understand you can defy the odds, but you can't defy my experience. People with poor credit and poor ability to pay back the debt they owe, why do you think you're going to get paid differently than somebody else?
And the way that a mortgage industry would analyze someone's credit and ability to pay, have you basically mapped that onto note buying, or do you have any other tricks in
to a
there?
degree. We're common sense note buyers, and we're not stringent like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, but that doesn't mean that everything that they consider is like completely wrong. We're just trying to measure somebody's propensity to pay. So credit and ability to pay are number one. And if you're creating paper and you're disregarding that, I can just tell you, you're going to wake up eventually and say, that didn't really turn out the way I thought. So I'm just trying to I'm just trying to give people a compression of time. If you do 1,000 of these, you're going to agree with me.
And you're looking at the propensity to pay. Are you looking at their story? That sounds like that plays into it a little bit? And
Yeah, so once again, somebody's got some injured credit and they say, look, we had this or that. There's a story around it, but there has to be redeeming factors. You have any relatives that you wouldn't loan money to?
Yeah.
We all do. Now, you think they can lay up a sad story on you? See, the problem is they've got a sad story and a sad story and a sad story. Like, it wasn't a guy where old Bill had this happen to him and he just pushed his way through it and made things back. Right? That's what I'm looking for. What's the common sense in it? And the best thing to say to start with is you got to start out with asking the question to start with. I mean, if you don't ask the question, you got nothing to work with, right? So qualifying a buyer is important. If you're lending money and you're not qualifying the buyer, I can tell you right now that you will eventually change your mind. And believe me, I've had a lot of hot shots in the land business. Oh, we don't do that. We don't need to do that. And then they see me 5 years later with a big tear running down their cheek. And I'm not exaggerating. They're like, Eddie, you were right. Okay. I'm just lending some experience that I've seen. Nobody's going to have a different result
over time.
Chronic slow pay borrowers are not profitable. If that file stays on your credenza, so to speak, all the time because you're having to deal with that borrower and you're having to go prop them up and you're having to go do this and that, there ain't no peace in that. And I'm 64 years old and I don't want to own that. I've already tried it. I started when I was 20 years old. I've tried everything. Second thing is the collateral. Basically, if it's junk collateral, you can't attract good people. That's basically what I found. And so I have a saying, I want that land to be sacred to the buyer. So this is a land podcast. We'll talk about land. I want it to be sacred to them. How are they going to fulfill their dreams on that property? If they're buying a sand lot in Fairfield, Arkansas, or Arizona, or a swamp lot in Lehigh, Florida, how are they going to fulfill their dreams on it? What's it going to take to put utilities on it and water and power and access? And you see what I'm saying? And if all that can't be true, then all of a sudden, while they may buy it and you may say, well, they paid for 2 years. I know, but I'm measuring it off because I'm going to measure the loan for a long period of time. And statistically, if it's not good collateral, I've found that they just fizzle out. Statistically, no one story is always going to fit every scenario. You can't just write one script and it's going to fit every deal. But once again, it does affect their propensity to pay, the likelihood they're going to pay. The next thing is equity. First thing I found about selling land is most people are in disbelief. Most land you can sell with 20 to 25% down, right? Now people say, oh, no, that's not true. You don't know. And you've seen my stuff. And I would say that what they probably start out with, quite honestly, is they're not marketing the land, trying to go find the best buyer. So let me tell you the best few words I've ever put in a Facebook ad or on a piece on a sign that's in the property or however you market it. So are you ready for it? Private financing for deserving buyers with large down. Every word in there I have thought about a lot. I've got the 10,000 hours on this one. And this will attract a quality of buyer. How many times have you seen people selling land and say seller financing, no banks?
Yeah. Seller financing, $99 down.
What does that say to the borrower or consumer that's looking at the ad? Does that say that there's some underwriting involved? Or does that say that even though my brother-in-law won't loan me money anymore, these guys are dumb enough to loan me money?
Yeah. Put a credit card on it and let's run.
So all of a sudden, you're waking up and realizing you had a big shining sign that said, I'm a pawn shop. And so understand that is what I'm saying. So I start out at the core of all of this and think everything I do influences it. All right, let's talk about the terms of the loan. Yes, land notes are written at a higher rate. So typical land note rates are 10 to 12% in today's market. And what's the term? The better the land, the longer the term. Yes, I know they do sand lots and they amortize the paper over 6 years. But once again, you've already found out that I'm not a giant fan of that paper anyway. I don't mind buying long-term notes on good collateral. I don't mind buying long-term notes. So 15 to 20-year notes are not a problem. And I've statistically found that there's no difference in the performance on a 15-year note versus an 8-year note because of the term. Because of the collateral, a lot different, but not because of the term. The next thing is pay history. So if you're creating really good land notes, then we don't need pay history, right? You create notes on really high grade property and a good down payment. We don't need pay history. Pay history is needed to cover up other sins. They didn't pull credits on these people that didn't qualify, but all these loans have 3-year seasoning. Okay. So the reason the seasoning matters in the conversation is because of lack of underwriting guidelines up front. That's why seasoning matters. And I have bought a lot of paper because people seller finance that haven't really followed a formula. And so I'm like, okay, I'll buy it because it's got seasoning. And then the last thing is the paperwork. And so the gurus particularly teach we're going to sell them on a land contract. The answer is in most states, the buyer has an equitable interest in the property. So if you go in there and they've owned it for a period of time or they have X amount of equity and stuff, they have an equitable interest in the property. So if they have an equitable interest in the property, an attorney that knows what they're doing is going to say, you can't do a termination of contract. You have to go foreclose because they have an equitable interest and you have to foreclose out their equitable interest. You can't just evict it. And so the idea that everybody writes land notes on land contracts is a myth. Now, listen, I bought 8,000 land contracts in probably the last 8 years. So it's not like I'm unfamiliar. It's not like I don't know how to. It's why I know all these laws, right? And I've done them in 40 states. So the idea here is the land contract is not worth as much money. What about Dodd-Frank? I know what the land gurus say. Like you're selling land, you're not subject to Dodd-Frank. If that land is perceived to be for residential purposes, it is subject to Dodd-Frank. So unless the buyer signs an affidavit and says this isn't for, I'm not going to ever build a house on it, then it can be perceived that it is for residential purposes. If you're going to sell it and their future is to build a house on it or build something that they occupy, could be even a barn dominium, then all of a sudden it is not away from Dodd-Frank. I know that I disagree with the gurus on that, but I happen to know what I'm talking about. I deal with people that have dealt in magnum numbers, and believe me, they spent a fortune in legal fees trying to figure out how they're not subject to Dodd-Frank, and their compliance specialist lawyers tell them that they are. I've testified recently in front of the Texas Finance Commission on the very subject of who is subject to Dodd-Frank and who's not. Once again, to your audience, I'm probably saying something different than they've been told. I got it.
So the land contract for deed, you're not a fan of, obviously. And so
it doesn't accomplish anything. It just
often
makes it way harder to paper it.
Mhm.
It's way harder to sell the loans. It's way harder to borrow money against it. It's way harder to do a lot of things, whether you're going to, in any way, you're going to recapitalize it. And the reason that people did it originally and why they did it 25 years ago, and yes, I was buying notes back then, so I know they did it because it wasn't, you didn't have to go through the same foreclosure process.
Mhm.
But states' laws have changed, particularly after 2008. And most states have established that the buyer has an equitable interest in the property. And you can't just take an eraser and write that off.
Mhm.
People say, I foreclosed and nothing happened. Let's say, and I didn't file a tax return and nothing happened. I mean, you can, but I'm just saying the penalty for a wrongful foreclosure is ugly. It's like giving the property back to them in treble damages in most every state.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's not something you want to go do.
yeah, so it's almost like there's this idea that people can trade sand lots and trade swampland and then they can do it on land contracts for deed and just slam all these things together, and some foreclose and they take them back. And it's almost like they're playing in a gray area there
You
where,
think?
yeah, where they can make
You
some
think?
money. If someone does that for 5 years, tell me maybe about what the consequences, like longer term on a business, could look like. Because I mean, people do it, but what's like the downside risk, the tail risk that maybe people aren't noticing?
I think the key to it is there's this myth that nobody's going to fight me. I'm going to go take it back and I'm going to go do this and that and stuff. And that can happen, but the more deals you do and the longer you do it, you're just leaving a risk trail behind you that if you ever become legitimate, then if you ever become legitimate, you can't go play that game anymore. That's note slumlording.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? I can be a landlord on property and somebody doesn't pay, and I can go knock on their door and say, "Where's your rent?" And they say, "I'm sorry, we don't have it." The guy says, "I noticed your door is loose. I'm going to let me work on your door." And he pops the pins off and takes the front door off and takes it with him. And landlords in 1960 would do ridiculous stuff like that. But if I say that to you today, you'd be like, "Man, Channel 8 News is going to be out here and they're going to," you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so you can claim that you're just going to cowboy everything. But the truth of the matter is, the biggest guys that have created land notes in the country, many of which have been my client, that have created hundreds of millions of dollars in land notes. And they used to do stuff when they were little and small, but then all of a sudden they found out they couldn't sell their paper and their paper wouldn't pay. And it was a revolving door. It wasn't, in other words, I tell people you can own a portfolio or you can own a business. You own a business because you can't ever get to so many notes because you're just going to re-roll those over and over. And then people think they're going to make money doing it. And I know what all the land gurus say. I've been doing it longer. I've met more operators that have built real fortunes out of it, and none of them do it the way they describe it.
Mhm.
So I just say, are they making more money selling education than they are actually doing the business?
Mhm.
And I'm not saying every guy that has land education is wrong. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. You and I know there's good and there's bad. But
Mhm.
just because you're on Facebook and you say something doesn't make it true. And I'm just for the good of the business. I want people to feel good about the people that they're putting on that land and they're providing them financing and they're saying, "I'm helping you have a dream. I'm willing to buy that kind of paper. I'm not willing to buy sandlot paper."
It's almost like there's an underlying theory of
You think if it paid and it was successful, don't you think I would be willing to buy it? So why am I not willing to buy it? Because nobody like me can underwrite it. I cannot measure the level of risk. Oh, by the way, I got 80 lots in Dublin Springs, Arizona right now if you want
there you go. It's almost like there's this underlying just philosophy on life and business in general, where you build it right, build a strong foundation, and then you're going to be able to build higher and better.
them.
Play games in the beginning. Yeah.
Isn't that funny how that works?
There's some things that are just natural laws that follow you around everywhere. Yeah. That's a quality take. And this gives you the ability to bundle these up, sell them to institutional investors. You have a legitimate business going. So it uncaps the upside a bit. Talk about how you bundle notes and how you put portfolios together and sell them. I think that's probably interesting to people. Give them some of the upside and why it's worth doing it correctly.
Land notes, most institutional mortgage banker operations won't buy notes on land. So if I know a lot of guys that in the institutional originated loans were sold to Fannie Mae and they had to buy it back, or loans that were paying and then all of a sudden they got in default and they had to do a modification, a reperform. Now it's paying again, a reperforming note. Those are called scratch and dent loans, similar to scratch and dent appliances. But there's a huge market. I know one firm that trades like 30 billion a year. So when I call them and tell them I have land paper, it doesn't fit most of their banks and hedge funds that buy, the insurance companies that buy that kind of stuff. They won't buy that asset class. So if I've had to go make a market for people that I could paint over a picture of, this is common sense. So my conversation doesn't change from the guy that owns the note from the guy that I'm going to package up a whole bunch of notes to and sell it. It's exact same conversation. It's make sense property, make sense underwriting. The people are likely to pay. They're going to be able to fulfill their dreams that they have for the property. all of a sudden they're going to want to pay us every month because they're getting what they want, and they're going to make sure we get what we want, which is the payment, right? And when you do that and you really look at it, you're right. We just have built up, we just legitimized the business, and the land guru thing has come around. It's not really been around that long. The whole land guru thing's really only been around probably 6 or 8 years. Now, there may have been some guy that said I was teaching it 10 years ago, but it wasn't a blip on the screen. Now, all of a sudden, it's become super popular and everybody's teaching it. We're going to go do it. And once again, I'm just trying to go help people with looking back in time and experience and say, these are what successful notes look like. Whether you sell them to me or you keep them, it doesn't make any difference. I don't want you to go sell all your notes to me. I want you to use this business to grow wealth. I think that's why most people did it, right?
Absolutely. That is a big reason I think a lot of people do it. What's the buyers that you're targeting, or that you're sitting under? Institutional investors, obviously. I think you mentioned dentists and maybe lawyers. Can you talk about who you work with, how you find those people, what the market looks like for those people? It sounds pretty blue ocean if people are doing it correctly.
Yeah. So what I found, the reason I have a training company is nobody's ever going to buy assets without training. There are websites, and I'm friendly with them, and they're friendly with me. But what happens is they have people that don't have education, and they go in there and click the buy button, and then all of a sudden they have buyer's remorse, and then they don't close. And then they type deals and they won't close. The reason is because they don't have any confidence in their decision. Education is nothing but confidence. Listen, I know that some doctor or dentist or high-end realtor that's a member of my NoteSchool membership, I know they're not going to go out and be on this podcast and go find a portfolio of notes. That's not what they do every day. They want me to go do that. They want me to go find them. They want me to vet them. They want me to go through the process. And then they want me to provide a done-for-you service that I basically hand it to them on a platter. And so we've figured out that we're filling a need between our land friends, which are you guys that have paper, and these group of high net worth people that want to go buy a predictable cash flow without a headache. And we're trying to serve the middle.
And how do land investors find you to present notes?
I'm in land masterminds. I'm on podcasts pretty frequently. We definitely target people that are vendors for land notes, whether they have specialty software or, that kind of thing. We're networking. We know a little bit of where to drill, but it's pretty common, Brandon, that somebody calls me like you did and says, hey, I was at an event and your name came up, blah, 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 and here we go. And that's not uncommon. But we're keeping the door open. We're trying to constantly reach out in the marketplace and keep the connections open and stuff. There's it's never intended to be in a bad tone, but I'm quick to define, hey, we don't buy notes on these lots that really don't. Let me give you a litmus test. If you're buying notes in a subdivision and the subdivision was 2,000 lots, and you look out there and there's a dozen houses on it, and the subdivision's 60 years old, guess what? It probably didn't work.
Do you go on to the online marketplaces and look for high quality notes there, or do you do most of your business just inbound?
No, we don't go to the websites.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're a little better known, we're more of a commodity in the market. We're a little better known than that.
How long does it take someone to get good at underwriting good notes or finding good notes and go through your...
Can you follow a recipe?
Make a cake. Yeah. Okay. You were involved in some you used to deal with horses or be in the horse industry.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
I grew up in the cattle auction barn in Mississippi, and I cowboyed, I rodeoed and horse showed. I never really got to ride good horses when I was a kid. So the note industry allowed me to have good horses. And so later, as a young business person, got to go ride a horse. I won the world on a couple of times as an amateur roper in the horse show world. And it was fun and entertainment. I wasn't a pro. I was a good, consistent amateur roper. I roped with some of the best in the world because the guys that coached me and helped me were like very successful professional level guys. So I was around very super talented people that were like the best. And I practiced good because I was practicing with the right folks, but it was fun. And then when our kids came along, they wanted to go do something else. And so we sold the trucks and trailers, and I don't consider that a sacrifice. It's just, we went and enjoyed another chapter in our life. I still like the cowboy thing, and I still have a lot of cowboy friends, but I don't actually rope anymore. I mean, I could. It's not like I'm completely incapable of doing it, but I'm certainly not practiced up. I wouldn't go put up a lot of money on me right now about that.
Do you think there's some crossover there with horses? I mean, seems like there might be something there where you look at the underlying qualities of something that's going to have value over time, and seeing value that's more core
I have an
level.
associate's degree in ranch management. I've been busting up land and doing it ourselves for over 30 years. So everything from land in South Texas to Carolinas and a lot of places along the way. So I found that the land business was a good business, and particularly the seller finance. And we would end up partnering with people that would bring us a portfolio of notes, because we would bring the financial side of the equation, and they were sort of the boots on the ground that sold the land. But we've always had a real strict thing about what was the purpose in the land, and what was somebody going to do with it, and was there value to it and stuff. And so I would say the two most common land tracts that I've bought the most of are what I would call country land. So people are just buying acreage from 5 to 50 acres, and they're probably going to retire on it, and they want to go take the kids out there on the weekend and drive out there with the four-wheeler and go shoot a beer can with a pistol and enjoy the land. And they have a future use for it and what they'd like to do with it. The other thing I bought a whole lot of is mobile ready lots. So people would sell the land and owner finance the land, and then the people would put a mobile home on top of the land. And I like to say that what we learned from that was the people say, hey, I raised my kids on dirt and not a concrete parking lot. So they wanted some acreage, and they were willing to live out a little bit because they did it. Mobile homes were affordable housing, but in both cases, if you stop and look, it answers the yes to the question. Like, it does let them fulfill their dreams on that land.
I usually ask people a similar question towards the end of the show. I ask if you could put just a short message, maybe a Twitter message. What would you say to people in general?
If you do this business, it will be good to you a long time in the future.
I like that. And if you were going to pass a question on to our next guest, what would you ask our next guest?
How does what you do bring value to people?
Love it. Love it. Eddie, it was fantastic to have you on the show today. Maybe final thoughts where people can find you online, and any final thoughts here for us?
So we have a team of people that work with people every day that sell land. We can help you with how to make better notes. We can give you matrices. We can give you information. We can talk to you about your notes. And so the easiest way to do that, if somebody's on vacation or whatever, all of these emails end up in all of our inboxes, and it's tradedesk@colonialfundinggroup.com. I know it's long, tradedesk@colonialfundinggroup.com. And you can say, hey, I saw Eddie on a podcast. I'm interested in a matrix on how to make better notes, or all that type of thing. And we'll share with you stuff, and no obligation that you ever have to do business with us.
Wonderful. Eddie, it was killer to have you on the show, and I really appreciate how you look long-term, build things the right way. I think that's a great message for the land community as we're all growing here and building something big for ourselves. So great talk today. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
The Legends of Land Show.